Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring something that perfectly blurs the line between science fiction and verified, declassified government history. We're unpacking a document released by the CIA back in 2000 that details a highly, let's say, unconventional experiment conducted in May of 1984. The target? The planet Mars. But they didn't use a telescope and they didn't launch a probe. No, they used a person, a subject allegedly possessing psychic or remote viewing abilities. Today, we're going to unpack exactly what the CIA saw on Mars, or at least what they thought they saw, and we'll stack those incredibly bizarre visions right up against the hard, undeniable scientific reality of what is actually up there.
Okay, let's dive into this. The setup for this experiment is literally like the ultimate cold open to a spy thriller. Before the interview even began, the subject was handed a sealed envelope. They were strictly instructed not to open it. Hidden inside that envelope was a simple index card with a very specific and highly unusual directive. It read, "The planet Mars, time of interest approximately 1 million years BC. I mean, the sheer audacity of this premise is fascinating, right? A U.S. intelligence agency was actively trying to peer back in time across millions of miles of empty space, using absolutely nothing but the human mind.
So the session was guided by a CIA agent, referred to simply as the Monitor. Now notice what the Monitor says here. They provide exact geographic coordinates, 40.89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west. But crucially, the Monitor never actually says the word Mars out loud, not once. The whole goal was to prevent the subject from being influenced by any prior expectations or biases. The subject had to rely entirely on whatever mental impressions they were receiving from the coordinates, and that sealed envelope just sitting in front of them. And almost immediately, the subject's responses take a wild turn. At those exact coordinates, they describe an enormous pyramid form sitting in a massive depression. Just think about the absurdity and the immense intrigue of this moment happening in a sterile CIA room back in 1984. Interestingly enough, those specific coordinates point to the exact same geological region where NASA's Viking 1 probe had photographed the infamous face on Mars just 8 years earlier in 1976. So you have to ask yourself, was the subject genuinely sensing something beyond the physical, or were they maybe subconsciously influenced by the lingering pop culture buzz of that famous photo?
Well, as the Monitor fed the subject new coordinates, the visions only grew more intense. The subject began using words like megalithic. They described looking up from deep inside a massive canyon at steep walls that just seemed to go on forever, noting that the walls themselves appeared to be deliberately carved out of huge sections of smooth stone. There were no intricate details, just towering, ancient, functional geometry. They were literally describing a world that had been engineered.
The sheer volume of sci-fi-esque details the subject provided is pretty staggering. They described a colossal marker resembling the Washington Monument, an obelisk. They claimed that giant pyramids were entirely unfurnished, acting strictly as functional shelters against devastating planetary storms. And then they described the inhabitants. They saw very tall, incredibly thin humanoid beings wearing fitted, light, silk-like clothing. The subject reported an overwhelming sense of melancholy. This was an ancient philosophical species facing a rapid environmental collapse. Their world was dying. And while a group of them had fled in shiny, metallic, rounded boats to find a new home, the ones left behind were simply waiting for a solution that, tragically, never came.
Project Stargate, the Cold War context.
So why on earth was the United States government spending time and taxpayer money to ask psychics about dying aliens on Mars? Well, to understand that, we really have to look at the broader context of Project Stargate. This timeline perfectly illustrates how a century of Mars mania collided head-on with Cold War paranoia. Ever since the 19th century, when astronomers mistakenly thought they saw artificial canals on Mars, pop culture has been absolutely obsessed with the idea of a dying Martian civilization. Fast forward to the 1970s, and the CIA starts hearing rumors that the Soviet Union is investing heavily in psychic research. Fearing a mental battlefield gap, the U.S. funded remote viewing at the Stanford Research Institute. Combine that Cold War anxiety with the public frenzy over the 1976 Face on Mars photo, and suddenly pointing a remote viewer at the Red Planet in 1984 doesn't seem quite so random. It was literally an intelligence agency pushing the absolute boundaries of what was possible.
But we also have to account for human psychology. Pareidolia is the exact reason we see a man in the moon, or, in 1976, a face in a blurry pile of Martian rocks. By 1984, the idea of ancient Martian ruins was everywhere in literature and film.
It is highly probable that the subject, a trained remote viewer who was likely aware of global mysteries, was subconsciously primed by this whole cultural phenomenon. Their mind may have simply been filling in the blanks of those coordinates with the grand sci-fi narratives of that era.
The scientific reality check. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern science pivots to completely debunk those psychic claims with hard geological facts. Because when we transition from the realm of the mind to the realm of the physical, science has a very different story to tell. Over the last few decades, we haven't just been looking at Mars. We've been mapping it, orbiting it, and driving rovers right over it. When we juxtapose the CIA documents' claims directly against high-resolution data from modern orbiters like the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the megalithic cities just vanish. Where the psychics saw perfectly carved canyons and obelisks, our cameras, which can see objects as small as a dining room table from orbit, see geological realities. We see incredible wind erosion. We see massive tectonic fractures like Valles Marineris. We see natural craters and sublimating underground ice. The structures that early enthusiasts thought were pyramids, they're revealed to simply be natural plateaus carved by millions of years of relentless Martian winds.
And this brings us to a really fundamental tool of scientific skepticism, Occam's razor. Faced with shapes on a distant planet, what is the simpler explanation? That an advanced, towering alien species built massive stone storm shelters that perfectly resemble human architecture? Or that wind, gravity, and erosion, forces we know definitively exist and operate on Mars, shaped the rock over billions of years? The hard truth is, the simpler geological explanation fits all the verifiable data we currently have.
But honestly, the actual rigorous scientific discoveries made by NASA's rovers are every bit as thrilling as the search for ancient cities. Just look at what we found on the ground. Spirit and Opportunity found hematite blueberries, proving liquid water once pulled there for extended periods. Curiosity drilled into the rock and found organic compounds, literally the chemical building blocks of life. And right now, Perseverance is rolling through Jezero Crater, exploring an ancient dried-up river delta. We aren't looking for obelisks, we are looking for microscopic fossils. We are looking for definitive proof that life, even at its most basic level, sparked on a second world.
The cosmic what if. Let's indulge the imagination for just a moment, because the true value of that 1984 CIA document isn't in its scientific accuracy. It's in the profound, philosophical questions it forces us to ask about our place in the universe. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most mind-bending concepts in astrobiology, panspermia. Remember how the psychic subject described a group of dying beings fleeing Mars in shiny metallic boats to find a new home? Well, what if early microbial life, or even something more, was transferred from a dying Mars to a young Earth? We already have meteorites here on Earth that we know definitively originated from Mars. If Mars had life first, is it possible that the seeds of our own terrestrial biology actually arrived from the red planet? It is a staggering thought experiment.
What makes the subject's vision of a dying civilization so incredibly compelling is that it actually perfectly mirrors the real scientific timeline of what happened to Mars. We know that billions of years ago, Mars was warm and wet. But then, step 1, its magnetic field collapsed. Without that shield, step 2 happened. The violent solar wind stripped away the planet's thick atmosphere. Then step 3, the surface pressure plummeted and the vast oceans either boiled off into space or froze underground, leading to step 4, total ecological devastation. The story of Mars is literally the story of a catastrophic planetary death. If anything lived there, they really would have faced the exact apocalyptic scenario the psychic described.
So what if the skeptics are wrong, and tomorrow, a rover sweeps away some red dust and reveals a genuinely carved, undeniable megalithic stone? The implications would be absolutely world-shattering. It would be undeniable, immediate proof of intelligent extraterrestrial life. We would see a total, ground-up reevaluation of almost every religious doctrine on Earth. The rush to reverse engineer alien technology would trigger both unprecedented collaboration and, for sure, massive geopolitical tension. But most importantly, it would cause a profound psychological shift in humanity. We would instantly know, without a shadow of a doubt, that we are part of a much larger, much older cosmic community.
The 1984 CIA experiment might have been a product of Cold War paranoia and cultural suggestion, but it successfully tapped into our deepest curiosities. Mars stands as a stark warning, a beautiful, desolate reflection of a world that lost its ability to harbor life. Whether we eventually find microscopic fossils in a dried-up riverbed, or whether the red planet has always been completely barren, the search itself changes us. So I leave you with this. If Mars is a reflection of a world that lost its environment, are we alone in the universe, or are we simply the next chapter in an incredible cosmic story? Let that sink in. Thanks for exploring this with me today.